A while back, I took a look at disc brake rotor size to see if bigger was any better, and it turns out it was.
But is bigger any better when it comes to the size of your cranks?
Oh. Well, in this video, we're going to compare some teeny weeny 165mm cranks up against these 180mm whoppers and see what the difference is.
But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to GCN Tech and hit that bell icon if you want to keep up to date. Should we get cracking, Alex?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, in case you're not familiar with crank length, it is this part of the bike. So how long is this part of the crank? Now, it's generally considered that smaller bikes will use shorter cranks and larger bikes will use longer bikes. The thinking behind it is because you want to try to keep the crank in proportion to the leg length of the rider.
In more recent years, we've seen many pros and amateur riders experiment and use shorter cranks than what would have otherwise been considered normal for their size. But that's particularly true for time trial riders who are seeking lots of different advantages. But is that really the case?
Yeah, when I was racing, I actually used to use 177.5mm cranks, so not the shortest cranks you can get on the market. But today we have cranks at both ends of the spectrum, and we're going to conduct a few tests. And after each test, we're going to give the crank that wins a point. At the end, the most points wins.
But before we dive into that, let's have a quick science lesson. To understand why crank length might have an impact on performance, you need to think of your cranks as levers that transfer your efforts into a turning force on the bike. Turning force, or torque, is measured in Newton meters and is calculated by multiplying the force from the rider, measured in newtons, and the length of the crank in meters. This will give us Newton meters. By using that calculation, it would appear that a longer crank length would result in more torque being applied to the bike and could make you ride faster. However, that isn't quite the case, because all of our bikes use a multiple geared system to manipulate our efforts relative to our cycling speed and the gradients that we ride on. Even if your bike is a fixie or a single speed, it still uses a geared system, just you've only got one option when you're riding. Gearing is a way of multiplying or reducing the torque and rotational speed of your input at the crank compared to the output at the rear wheel. A 1-to-1 ratio means the wheel is rotating at the same rate of the cranks and the torque is the same. Whereas a 4-to-1 ratio means the rear wheel rotates 4 times per 1 revolution of the crank, which is required for high speeds, but means the torque at the wheel is 4 times less than the torque at the cranks. A 1-to-4 ratio would mean the rear wheel rotates once per 4 crank revolutions, perfect for climbing when extra torque is required, and this would multiply the torque 4 times from the cranks.
Okay, science lesson almost over. Now we know we can manipulate the amount of torque we produce on our bike using our gears depending on the type of terrain we're riding over. So does that mean that crank length doesn't matter?
No, Connor. Crank length does matter, because it's not just about the amount of torque we can produce, it's about the power we use. That's what determines how fast we ride. Power is a function of torque multiplied by rotational speed. So whilst you could, in theory, keep going longer in crank length to increase that torque, you would not be able to maintain the same rotational speed because the pedal has got further to travel. As the radius of your pedaling circle increases, your cadence will reduce and therefore your power output will reduce in line with that cadence, which means we need to look at other areas to compare, starting with
having a smaller crank can often improve your pedaling efficiency as there is less movement required to turn the pedals, and it can improve your hip mobility by opening up the front of the hips, which is generally good because it avoids tightness developing in this area. Something that I think is quite a good thing for most cyclists, but especially time trialists, as it helps them adopt a more aerodynamic position.
A longer crank, however, will require greater movement from the leg, which is a little bit less efficient than the shorter cranks, and it will also close up that hip angle that can limit or restrict your ability to ride in some aerodynamic positions.
But it's not quite as simple as that when it comes to bike ergonomics, because we should consider other parts to the pedaling movement. So that's things like your leg length, your saddle height, and your saddle fore and aft. Obviously, Alex, well, we can't adjust our leg length, can we?
No, we can't.
Unless you've got a saw and a surgeon, No, don't do that. But you can adjust your saddle height and your saddle fore and aft, and doing so will impact your hip and leg angle. So it's not just about your crank length.
There's almost endless detail we could go into when talking about the pedaling mechanics, and the basic principle is very similar to a 4-bar linkage, where you've got the reciprocal movement up and down of your legs connected to the rotational movement at the crank. But the basic point we're trying to make is, it's not just about crank lengths. You've got to consider the other options and the ergonomic and the bike fit related aspects as well.
Yeah, and as with all bike fit aspects, it is recommended that you see a specialist when considering your position on the bike, because everyone is different, everyone has different bodies, and that does impact how you sit on the bike. But at this stage, well, I do believe it's 1 point to shorter cranks.
It is indeed 1 point to short cranks. I know you might not think so, but your ability to pedal round corners is greatly affected by the length of your cranks, and this might not be super crucial when you're on your social rides or ride into the cafe, but if you're racing, it can give you a small advantage over your competition if you can pedal that bit sooner out of the corners, and it's something that I used to great success in my own racing career.
Yes, when you use longer cranks, they're going to clip the ground that bit sooner than shorter cranks when you lean the bike over, meaning that if you do use shorter cranks, you're going to be able to pedal that bit sooner out of a corner compared to your competition if they're on longer cranks. And we're going to put this to the test, aren't we, Alex?
We are, and to test it, we're going to use Connor's phone here, which has got an app on it that can measure the angle of the bike as we lean it over until the point when the pedal clips the ground.
Yep, so I'll just show you now, and this app has got some quite dodgy targeted ads, but we won't go into that.
Starting with 180mm cranks. What have we got?
So, that's about 26 degrees. That's what you've got to play with in your corner.
Oh, fair. Let's get some 165s on, see what we've got next. Right, we've got 165mm cranks. Connor, lean that bike over.
Let's do it. And we have got a fair bit more to play with.
Oh, look at it go.
I know, well past it. So about 31 degrees.
What's that, at least 4 degrees more?
5 degrees.
5 degrees? Oh, math's never my strong point. But a significant change nonetheless, so is that an additional point to shorter cranks?
Shorter cranks.
Right then, next experiment, and accurately measuring the difference in aerobic efficiency between different crank lengths was going to be pretty tricky to do here at GCN Megabase. So for a more clear-cut test, we're going to look at maximal power using the different crank lengths. And to do that, we're going to ride in a set gear with a set resistance on the Wahoo trainer.
Yeah, nice simple experiment really. We're going to do 3 max sprints at each crank length and then take the average of those values as our kind of power result in the sprints, and then we're going to compare the difference really between the long cranks and the shorter cranks. See what the differences are. And I think I'm going first. I am questioning the fact I'm doing this on a kid's-sized bike.
Hold on, that's my bike.
Okay, right. To keep the test fair, we're doing it on flats, and we're going to start off with 165mm cranks. And I have just warmed up with a bit of lubrication on the joints, haven't I?
Yeah,
You catch that? Thanks, mate. Right, let's do it. Max sprint.
Right, Connor, you ready? 3, 2, 1. Whoa, 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 whoa. Oh my God. Yeah. Woo. Sprint 2, 3, 2, 1. Go, go, go. Yeah, done. Sprint 3, 3, 2, 1. Go, 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 go. Come on. 3, 2, 1. Yep.
2, 1.
Go, 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 Level 8. I don't know where. Oh! 502.
Come on. Right, 3, 2, 1. Go, 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 go. Up, and that fish and chips. 882. Fair one. Okay, that was a bit more like it, but third attempt. Come on, you can do it, Alex. Come on, I believe in you, mate. Come on. 3, 2, 1.
Right, Connor, on to the 180mm cranks. Sprint 1, 3, 2, 1, go, go, go!
Oh, it does feel easier.
God, look at him go! Yeah. Oh. Sprint number 2, 3, 2, 1, go, go, go!
Yeah. Bit down on that one, I was tired.
Go, go, go!
Come on, cowboy!
Come on! Big one, come on! Come on, get those legs going! What did you get, 2,000 watts?
720.
Oh, very good, mate.
Okay, right, countdown now. Come on, Alex. Big pain face now. Big pain face. I want to see you push those muscles. 3, 2, 1. Come on, Alex. Time the ducklings to the pond. 3, 2, 1. Up, 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 up. Come on, keep pushing, keep pushing. Don't relax here. Come on. Look at those numbers. Ooh, that's decent. Come on, it's time to turn that key, put it in the lock, and unlock your potential.
Good.
3, 2, 1. Up, 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 up. That's it. Push. Keep pushing. Woo! Oh, baby. That's a big one. Cracked it.
Right, the results are in from our incredibly accurate and scientific test. Connor, hit us.
Yep, so I managed a roughly 200 watt increase on the longer cranks compared to the shorter cranks. And I know it's not the most scientific of experiments, but it did feel a lot easier to get the power out on those longer cranks. But what about yourself, Alex? What do you think?
Completely agree, actually. Yeah, it definitely felt easier to get the pedals turning with those longer cranks. I didn't see quite the improvements you did with the longer cranks. I saw 150 watt improvement, but it's considerable just for a change in crank length, isn't it?
Yeah, it's impressive. So I guess that's 1 point to the longer crank.
Fantastic. On to our next test.
The weight of your cranks will vary depending on the ones you have, but when comparing like for like, shorter cranks will always weigh less, simply because there's less material in them.
And it's not surprising, to be honest, but on a typical set of cranks, you can save anywhere between 80 to 100 grams if you were to switch from 180 down to 165. And I'm not surprised, to be honest, and it's a great way of saving some weight without doing a particularly expensive upgrade, just switching to a shorter option of what you've got.
Whew, another point for shorter cranks, I think.
It is indeed.
Okay, so that's our mini experiment over, and the scores are in: 3 points to shorter cranks, 1 point to longer cranks.
But the answer to our original question is not as clear-cut as that, because we've been using really short cranks and really long cranks, because there is that middle ground, which is the most common size, which you see on bikes. And it's not by chance, it's 172.5 millimeters, and that sits slap bang in the middle of the 165 and the 180 millimeter cranks.
But I think the main thing to take away from all this is that crank length sits, it's kind of like one piece in the puzzle to your pedaling movement. It's not the be all and end all. Changing it on its own is not drastically going to transform you or your bike into something it wasn't in the first place.
Going up or down one small size and making a small change to your crank length is something you can quite easily do at home and make adjustments for that. But if you're going to make a significant change to your crank length, then I suggest you seek the advice of a professional bike fitter to make sure you're set up and they can advise you accordingly on the best cranks for you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and it does come into effect when you have a bit of sensations on the bike as well, what you kind of feel, what feels right really, because I just preferred longer cranks despite the science. But
I still prefer shorter cranks.
Yeah, so there you go. The argument still rages on. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up.
Well, let us know your thoughts on crank length in the comments section down below. See you next time.
Thanks for watching.
See ya.